Okay, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to study Parshas Miketz together. Always an incredible parsha to study. Almost always, I think, is coincides with Hanukkah. Not always, but almost always. And what I'd like to focus on is to pick it up at the third Aliyah, where Paro starts to appoint Yosef. And the question is, I don't think there's a more polarizing figure between the rabbis versus the academics of the Bible than Joseph. In the rabbinic mind, Yosef is Yosef at Tzaddik, Yosef the righteous one, the one who is a Jew even while he's living in Egypt. He keeps his Jewish faith and he sets it up for all of his brothers to continue and to survive in Egypt. Joseph is the hero, but in the academic circles, a view popularized by Professor Aaron Waldowski, whose son Ben Waldowski often studies with us at our Rashi class. Yosef is a complicated figure, the figure who enslaves the Egyptians and thereby creates the bureaucratic apparatus to one day enslave his own people. So it's a complicated story. Also, one more thing before we begin. There's many parallels between the Yosef story and the Mordechai story. And they're both stories of the Jew, the Israelite in the diaspora, achieving the second in command, the number two. And this is a complicated role. If it was a complicated role for many years, for all of Jewish history, up until the modern day period where Israel is now a sovereign state. So let's look at chapter 41, verse 39, which is after Joseph has now interpreted the dreams. He has told Pharaoh how he can preserve his wealth and avoid the lean years of the famine. And now we'll look at Pharaoh's reaction and we'll see our own opinion about this matter. So verse 39, Vayomer Paro al Yosef. Paro says to Joseph, Achrei hodia elokim loschas kol zos. After, one second. Hold on 1 second. Just want to fix my resources to the right place. Okay, fine. Okay, fine. So, Vayomer Paro al Yosef Achrei hodia elokim loschas kol zos. After God has informed you of all this, given you all this approach, this technique, we see ein navon v'chacham kamocha. There's nobody who's wise or as understanding as you. Verse 39, there's nobody as wise, discerning and wise as you. What does that mean? Because Joseph had asked Paro to appoint a discerning and wise man. Well, now, that was in the previous verse. He says, Yosef had said to Paro, he says to him, Paro should appoint an ish navon v'chacham and place him over the land of Egypt. And then he says, Paro said to his servants, have you seen anybody who has the spirit of God like this man? And now Paro says to Joseph, after God has informed you of all this, there's nobody wise and understanding like you. You have to be the one. Meaning to say, you're the one, obviously. We're not going to find anyone like you. You're the person. There's nobody else. We're never going to find anybody else who's as wise as you. There's a lot of discussion about this phrase, this powerful phrase in the Hebrew. We just distill this phrase. The phrase is Achrei hodia okim otzvas kol zos. After God has made all of this known to you, we see there is nobody who is wise and understanding like you. So we see after God has made all this known to you, we see there's nobody who's wise and understanding like you. So there's a couple of comments on this that first of all, we have the Dubna Magid. He gives a parable. The Dubna Magid gives us a parable that'll help us understand it. So there was one merchant who opened a large store, and he basically had a big department store. A lot of very fancy, precious objects were sold there. So the heads of the city obligated him to pay a lot of very high taxes, because it seemed to them that if this guy is selling all these things in the department store, he's obviously very wealthy. But the owner of the store was very upset. He says, no, I'm selling a lot of things, but what I'm selling is not mine. I'm basically got them on credit. I'm selling them for other people. It's not really mine. So we see from here, said the king, this means that you're obviously very rich, because if you had no money, nobody would have given it to you. Obviously, you're the one who has a lot of money, or else why would all these people trust you with it? So Paro said this to Joseph. I heard you say that you can hear the dream and you could give the solution, meaning to say that you're wealthy with knowledge and wisdom. And Joseph said, no, it's not mine. The wisdom comes from God. So Paro said, if that's what you're saying, it's truth. That proves that the Spirit of God is coming upon you. Meaning to say, because who does God give the ability to interpret other dreams? Only you, not other people. That must mean God is giving it to somebody who has wisdom himself. Otherwise, God wouldn't have given it to you. So this is a proof that Joseph was a person of great wisdom. Another comment on this is Rav Simcha Zissel of Chelm. He says like this. He says, because why did Pharaoh said all of a sudden, after God has made known to you all of this, we see that there's nobody wise and understanding like you. The previous verse was, Pharaoh said, has he seen anybody who has the Spirit of God in him, like this man? And now he says, Pharaoh says to him, you're wise and understanding. So we see from here, says Rav Simcha Zissel, that somebody who has true God-fearing, who's truly a person who's fearful, who's in awe of God, he must be wise and understanding. Maybe he doesn't have the IQ, but he definitely has the insight into the world. Somebody who has the insight into the world enough to be God-fearing must also have the insight to be the person who's the steward of our land. One more story about this, and then we'll go on to the next verse. So there was a story that one time two wealthy person came to the Noda B'Yehuda, Ezekiel Landau, the chief rabbi of Prague, and a person who was playing. So two wealthy people came before the Noda B'Yehuda for a court case. They submitted themselves to the judicial ruling of the Noda B'Yehuda. So while they were coming to the court case, there was a person who was playing I guess like a musical instrument, a harp, he came by and he stood near their houses, and while they were arguing, he started to play the I don't know, the harp, the violin. So, excuse me, I made a mistake with the story. This is the story. Two people came before the Noda B'Yehuda, and they had a litigation. They said one time a musician came and played the music in between our two homes. So they got into an argument. One said he's playing it in honor of me, and the other one said he's playing it in honor of me. And so because these two people were both extraordinarily wealthy, they decided to make a, they argued, and then they said, okay, we're going to make like a bet. Who do we think this musician is playing for? And we'll go to the Noda B'Yehuda to decide, because he was a person of great wisdom, and whatever he'll decide will follow. So after they each put forward their claims, they each argued why the musician was coming to play for them, and they paid the Noda B'Yehuda for his time. And so then the Noda B'Yehuda said, I'll tell you the truth. Okay, you want to hear this? He said, really, the musician's not coming for either of you. The musician came for me. He knew that you would argue. It was all from Hashem, that you would both come before me, and you'd have to pay me a big fee to be the judge in this case. So therefore, the musician is not coming for either of you. He's coming for me. That's what the Noda B'Yehuda said. He said, this is what Pharaoh said when he heard the words of Joseph. Joseph said he knew to appoint a person who was wise and understanding. He said, oh, I see that the purpose of this dream was not like we thought for Paro, and not like the Egyptians thought, so that we don't die by a famine. But the main purpose of the dream was so that Joseph should ascend to greatness. And so therefore, since God made this known to you, we see that you're the one, and there's nobody wise and understanding like you. That's the story of the Noda B'Yehuda. That's how he explains it. I don't know if it's a real story, but they tell that story about the Noda B'Yehuda. Okay, so now the next verse, we're continuing with this story. It says, Atati al Beisi, Pharaoh says, you'll be all over my household. On your basis, all my people will be sustained. Rak hakisei agdal mimeka. Only the throne I'll raise above you. Vayomer Paro Yosef. Paro says to Joseph, Pharaoh says to Joseph, I placed you all over all of Egypt. Vayaser Paro es tabaso. And this reminds us of Achashverosh and Mordechai. Pharaoh removed his ring. He removed his ring. And he put it on the hands of Joseph. He dressed him in linen garments. This is literally like Mordechai. It's the dream of the Jewish viceroy for all of history. That the king loves you so much, he gives you his ring, gives you his garments. Vayasem revida zahav al tzavaro, and he places a gold chain upon his neck. Another way to look at this is that Joseph is also abandoning his clothes of being Jewish and adopting the Egyptian way of dress, adopting the Egyptian dress. One of the, there's a midrash that says that the reason why the Jewish people were able to survive in Egypt, one of the reasons is they kept 3 commandments, or 3 things. That they kept the language, their names, and also they kept their dress. I feel like this midrash is almost like the one who protests too much. Because first of all, we see from here, Joseph took off his garments and dressed like an Egyptian. Number 2, we see from when the brothers come down and interact with Joseph, that there had to be a person who was a translator in between them. So the understanding was that even in Egypt, Joseph already was assumed to not know the Hebrew language anymore, or whatever language they were speaking, even though Joseph really did know it. And the other thing is that they kept their names. This is also ironic, because as we'll see in a few moments, that Paro gave Joseph an Egyptian name. Joseph drops his Jewish name, drops the name that he was given at birth, and he adopts an Egyptian name. So I feel like this midrash is trying to protest against the pshat, because the literal explanation is that Joseph abandoned the dress, the language, and the names. So, Vayirkavo so b'markevet HaMishneh, Vayarkevo so b'markevet HaMishneh, and Paro had Joseph drive in his second chariot, Asher Lo, Vayikru Lefanav Avrech, and he called him Avrech. What is this word Avrech? V'nasono to al kol eretz Mitzrayim, and he placed him over all of the land of Egypt. So Joseph already has a new name. They called before him everywhere he went. They called him the Avrech. What's the Avrech? So here we have a few explanations. We'll go through this slowly. Rashi first cites the position of Unclus, or he cites the position of the Targumo, which is Dain Abba Ramalka. This one is a father to the king, or a patron of the king, meaning to say that the king takes care of him. The king has appointed him here. That the word Rach, Rashi says, in Aramaic means king. Actually, in other versions of Rashi, it says Ibelashon Romi. In Latin, it's king. Rome in language. And we know that that's how you say king in Latin is rex. So therefore, Rashi says that this is a Latin word, which is bizarre, because we're not going to say it's really Latin, but maybe it comes from an ancient word predating Latin, because it's called Avrech, the father of the king, or father to the king, or father from the king, meaning, or patron of the king. So father of the king, meaning he supports the king. And Shutfin, there's an expression, he's neither a king nor a son of a king. So Rashi says it is an Aramaic word. But then Rashi also cites the Agadah, that this is a compliment specifically for Joseph, not just a general term. How is it a compliment specifically for Joseph? Avrech ze Yosef. This is a compliment to Joseph. Shu av b'chachma v'rach b'shanim. Joseph was, so the Avrech is a combination of older and younger, but Av here means he's a father in terms of wisdom, v'rach b'shanim, and tender in years. So that's what he's saying, that Joseph he's a young genius. He's a young genius. Then Rashi goes on a little bit more, and he says, Amar lo Rabbi Yossi ben Durskamis. Rabbi Yossi ben Durskamis said to Rabbi Yehuda when he suggested this approach. Hold on one second. He said to Rabbi Yehuda when he suggested this approach, he said, Ad matai ma'aveis aleinu es haksuvim. How long are you going to corrupt the scripture to us? Meaning to say, you're giving us a reading that's nowhere found in the literal text. What does Avrech mean? Birkayim, knees. It means the knees. Shakol you nichnasin v'yotzin tachas yado. Everybody would come in and exit by his authority. Meaning to say, everyone's bowing down to Joseph and acknowledging his authority. As it states, v'nasan oto, he shall place him over the land. So we see here, several different explanations of Avrech. Avrech could either mean patron of the king, a supporter of the king, that's onkelos. Rashi says this is supported from an Aramaic or possibly a Latin word. Then Rabbi Yehuda says it means father of wisdom, but young in years, that he was smart but young. And Rabbi Yossi ben Durskamis says that it means knees, that from Berkayim, that everyone had to bend their knees to acknowledge him. But Rabbi Yossi ben Durskamis didn't just say, I disagree with you. He says, how long are you corrupting the text? A very, very strange reaction, because his explanation could arguably be farther away from the text than Rabbi Yehuda's. He says, how long are you corrupting the text? And then he goes on to give an explanation which is possibly even farther away, that it refers to bowing down. Avrech refers to Berkayim. So what's going on here?
That is the accepted Christian translation.
What's the accepted Christian translation?
Bow the knee. That meaning that when the chariot was going in the streets, there was somebody running before the chariot, like Eliyahu with Achav, basically announcing that the viceroy is coming. Bow the knee. Anyway.
Very nice. So they're saying it means bow the knees. So maybe if that's really the case, you can understand why maybe this is the source of a polemic. I don't know. So the Mishkan, we'll just quote one explanation of the Mishkanos Yaakov. He says, why was Rabbi Yossi so upset at Rabbi Yehuda that he said, how long are you corrupting the text? Even if he doesn't accept his explanation, there are 70 faces to the Torah. It's not the craziest explanation that we've ever heard, and it received such a forceful response. So his idea is, says the Mishkanos Yaakov, because what is he saying? He's saying that he was wise, wise in wisdom, virach, but young. That's actually a pejorative comment. He's wise, but he's still young, but he's still immature. Meaning to say, the compliment would have been, he's young, but wise. He should have said, if you want to give him a compliment, he would have said, Rach Av, he's young but wise. But instead, the way you're translating it, Avreich, is actually pejorative. He's wise but young. That's not a good thing. The good thing is to say he's young but wise, not he's wise but young. And so therefore, he was very upset because he took it as a personal attack upon Joseph. So let's continue. So it says in verse 44, Vayomer Paro Yosef, Paro says to Joseph, Ani Paro, I'm Pharaoh, V'ladecha lo yarim ish es yado v'esragol b'chol Mitzrayim. And without you, nobody can lift up their hand and their leg in all of Egypt. This too reminds us of Mordechai, that nobody was above him aside from Achashverosh. Vayikra Paro, Shem Yosef Tzafnas Paneach. Vayitain lo et Osnas bas Potifera Kohen onu isha. Vayetze Yosef haaretz Mitzrayim. This verse, in this one verse, we're seeing the literal reading is Joseph is abandoning everything. He's getting enamored by the ability to join Egyptian muckety mucks. And what is he saying? Paro gives him an Egyptian name, Tzofnas Paneach. Number two, he takes a wife from the priestly class of the Egyptians. He takes an Egyptian wife. Number three, Joseph goes out onto the land of Egypt. He's an Egyptian. This is deeply problematic. Let's see what Rashi says. Rashi says right away, what is it? What is Tzofnas Paneach? Mifaresh Hatzfunot. He's one who deciphers the hidden words, or deciphers the hidden matters. And then Rashi tells us, Ein lepaneach dimyon bamikra. There is no other similar word to paneach in the Bible. So paneach is, as we say, a hapax legomenon. It's a word that only appears once in the entire Bible. So we really don't know what it means. We're just guessing. And Rashi guesses that it means mifaresh hatfunot. One who, I mean, it's not just Rashi. It's based on the Gemara. It's a little bit related to that when we say on Seder night, we talk about Kadesh Orchatz Karpas Yachatz Magid Rochta Motzi Matzah Maror Korech Shochan Arach, and the next is Tafun, the hidden part, the Afikomen. Right here, that's the same word. And then Rashi says, who is this woman who Yosef marries? Rashi says it was Osnat, the daughter of Potiphar. Potiphar is who was the person who previously had enslaved Joseph and then had Joseph thrown in prison. But now he's called Potiphera because he became impotent because he desired Joseph for Mishkav Zachar. Also, Rashi is giving us a twist on the figure of Potiphera, of Potiphar, whose wife wanted to have an adulterous relationship with Joseph. And we're being told that Potiphar himself also desired Joseph. And so what does Joseph do? He ends up marrying his daughter. That's going to be one Seder table. You have a lot of love triangle there. Baruch atah Adonai Muhammad Shachol Mimeno. So then Joseph goes out on the land. Let's talk about this Rashi for a moment. What does it mean, the Tzofnas Paneach? The Tzofnas Paneach. So, Reb Zev of Mastrikov says that what is the part that's hidden? That Joseph was the one who's the decipherer of the hidden. He was a decipherer of the evil inclination. The evil inclination is hidden in our heart, meaning to say, the Yetzer Hara is called the Tzfoni, that's hidden in the heart of man. But Joseph, it wasn't hidden before Joseph. Joseph knew that the Yetzer Hara was not his friend. And so therefore, Joseph saw clearly when he was being pushed to act in a way that was not in the best interest of himself spiritually, and it was revealed before him. That's the biggest challenge for us. We fool ourselves into thinking that this is the proper way to act, when really it's a sinful way to act. So for Joseph, the Yetzer Hara, this inclination to do evil, was revealed. Now, why did Paro? Oh, hold on 1 second. We'll stop for a second. I want to talk a little bit about why Paro gave Osnat, the daughter of Potiphar, for a wife for Joseph.